So tell me when. Right. Hello, everybody, and good evening to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. It's Wednesday, the 29th of September. We're just bang on 5:30. Before we start, we do have two substitutions. Councillor Mason has sent his apologies and is being substituted by Councillor Daubney, and Councillor Lomas has also sent her apologies and is being replaced by the very esteemed Councillor Janet Looker. So welcome to you all. I hope you've had a chance to read the papers. Agenda item 1, are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of September. Can I take it that these are an accurate record of the meeting? Councillor Fisher. Your mic, Councillor Fisher.
Page 4, the third paragraph, starting Councillor Kilbane. I can't make sense of that paragraph. I just wonder if people would just like to read through.
In what respect?
Well, it's Councillor Kilbane noted he believed he was disappointed that the guidance on members not being allowed to take part in the decision on the use of a settlement agreement in cases where a complaint was made against that member had been included, but is that had been
Is
included?
It have to be included or have been
I can find it difficult. From what I say, I thought he was quite pleased that the paragraph had been included, that members couldn't take part in any.
Somebody's going to have to remind me what was. I think you're right. I think it probably should have been had been included. If that could be amended. If somebody
I think
could,
that just needs checking and clarifying, because I don't think it's exactly what Councillor Kilbane said. I think he was noted that he was pleased that the paragraph saying that members couldn't take part in a set decision that included them.
Yeah.
So just
could you
clarify
that's very helpful, Councillor Fisher. I haven't picked that up. There was some matters arising, but and we will come to that in the substantive agenda about wide public engagement in the forming of the Constitution, and I have had the opportunity to speak with the monitoring officer in respect of that. Are there any other matters of accuracy? No. So matters arising. In the section review of the Council's Constitution, which is 24, I'm going to hand over to our monitoring officer. Could you just introduce yourself, Janie, and your role?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Janie Berry. I'm the Director of Governance and the Council's Monitoring Officer. In respect of the review of the Constitution, I have met with the Chair and Vice Chair of the committee, and I've also now received nominations for the cross-party working group. The first meeting is established for next week, and I've spent some time with the Chair and Vice Chair as well in terms of the sections which the cross-party working group is going to be asked to consider and the sections which should be retained for consideration by the Audit and Governance Committee. With respect, Chair, would it be acceptable to give more of a detailed update as part of the update on the action plan, as it forms part of that agenda item?
Yeah, I think that would make absolute sense. So that if there are no other matters arising, Councillor Webb, sorry. I just assumed there was going to be no other matters arising.
It wouldn't be the start of this meeting if I didn't ask the same question. Can we get a handle on the finances so basically what is it costing for this process? As in point 21, we were going to get an update from the section 151 officer tonight.
Yeah, we're going to pick that up when we get to the review of the action plan, and I think that we may have an answer to that. Yes, I'm getting nods there. So you may actually get to find out the answer. Good. Other than that, we shall then move on to agenda item 3, which is public participation. We have 2 members of the public wishing to speak to committee tonight. The first is Gwen Swinburne, who wants to speak on issues within the remit of this committee. Welcome, Gwen. It's very cold. Yes, that's one of the downsides of the COVID regulations. We all end up freezing.
Yeah,
yes,
I know.
yes. Well,
Thank you.
I've got my thermal vest on, so I'm not too bad at the moment.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to ask Robert to do the timings for me, our Democratic Services Officer. He will give me a shout when it's 30 seconds, and I'll give you a shout when it's 30 seconds.
It's all right, I'm in time.
You have 3 minutes, ready when you are.
Chair, thank you. Despite your directions, the staff continue to produce pejorative public participation minutes. This absolutely has to stop. As you should clear the minutes, if the monitoring officer won't address your stated wishes, you must please ensure the draft minutes are not published without your oversight. Chair, in your last meeting, I was disturbed to see the 800-page draft constitution written by the monitoring officer without the promised full engagement, or any, it seems, with members. You rightly said you couldn't consider her draft report and the frankly ludicrous recommendations to accept in full all her unmarked changes. So then you agreed to set up a cross-party working group and plan, which I had understood would be reported at today's meeting. It seems like it is, but the agenda is silent. Has it been agreed? What is the work plan? The Constitution and the monitoring officer's interpretation is at the heart of the many governance failures we are continually subjected to. At no point has there been a strategic discussion about the Constitution, what isn't working strategically and specifically. This is an opportunity lost and will no doubt be a detriment to good governance. So now you are being rushed again, 6 weeks roughly, and why are you being rushed? Well, unbelievably, the threat of some perceived sanction by the external auditors for not completing one line in the Public Interest Report Action Plan. Chair, any reasonable auditor would see a rushed constitution will simply be counterproductive. Let's not forget in any event that elements of the action plan from the last Public Interest Report are still not actioned. So this faux urgency on behalf of officers is derisory. I contend confected only to minimise the oversight of the Constitution. Chair, finally, as the defining internal document guiding governance of this place, I was shocked to see at no point are citizens consulted either on the monitoring officer's draft or your eventual final draft. This is a transparency outrage that must be addressed. We are entitled to be consulted through this process and to be properly consulted on your final draft. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gwen. I suspect a number of the points you've raised will be covered in the later agenda items. Thank you. And our second speaker is Andy Mendes, former independent member of this committee, as I always keep saying to him, and his views are always very welcome. So, Andy, I shall hand to you.
I did look at I watched the video of me last time, and I wondered who this old man was staggering up to the microphone. So hopefully I'm going to look strong and hot tonight. Right. And I also point that I've got probably half a minute or a minute in the bank if I overrun from last time. But I'll do my best. Okay, thank you. So I'd like to comment on both the substantive topics this time. First on settlement agreements. Thanks for taking on board most of my observations from last time. On further reflection, the paper does seem to me to be overcomplicated. I'm not sure it needs to detail all the reasons for getting to a settlement agreement and a severance payment in section 4, but given that we do, it is now comprehensive, I think. And in this context, I'm not worried that Colin features large in the links, obviously Colin that I can't meet. In the revised paper, I note there continues to be a tension between the avowed position that these payments should be truly exceptional and this statement, 611, because it says consideration should be given to the number of other special severance payments agreed in the last 12 months and those the payment of which is pending. So it may no longer refer directly to a budget, but if it looks like a budget and it smells like a budget, it seems to me it's still in there. The government guidance is interesting. It states that sign-off must be from the Chief Operating Officer with clear approval from the leader. Maybe it's better to stick with executive members in our circumstances, but hey, that's what the government says, and it's good to know we don't always slavishly follow government guidelines. It also seems to propose a potential conflict because it says that the Section 151 officer has an important role in holding councillors to account, and his duties to alert councillors and the auditor in the case of unlawful expenditure, and also that as part of their duties, an authorities 151 officer, where appropriate, the monitoring officer, should take a close interest in and be able to justify any special severance payments that are made by that authority, and in particular, any payments that are not consistent with the content of this government guidance. Our procedures clearly involves the 151 officer in the approval as well. So good luck, Debbie, in handling that juggle. That's enough on settlements. So the other point I want to talk about is Make It York. And first of all, to thank you for following through on this topic. It seems to me an important role of audit and governance to intervene in such situations when we get such a damning audit report. Charlie's report does put a very positive gloss on things, which is quite a challenge given the audit report, which must have tested Max's inability to give a no assurance opinion, I think. So I'm sure you'll pick up on the detail as you get there, but I'd ask you to pose a few questions on my behalf. First of all, did he or anyone notice the absence of monthly reports in 2018-19? And if so, why didn't he insist on their delivery? Did he have any way of knowing whether Make It York were working within the TECL rules during this period? Given the rules around TECL companies, does he believe that CYC was or is at risk of legal challenge during the period when there were no performance reports? And finally, the strategic priorities section of the Make It York website is currently greyed out. Does Charlie or anyone have any idea what they are? And will they be shared anytime soon? But I'm reassured that Charlie says at the end of his paper, there were no specific risk issues arising from this report. So that's okay then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sure we will be covering a number of these. And I just would like to say, although I said your views were always welcome, I would like to say all the public participants' views are always welcome. Well, I saw the look on your face, Gwen, which made it sound as though I was dismissing your views. No, they're always very, very welcome. Thank you, and thank you both. So we shall then move to agenda item 4, which is the report in the public interest assurance support from the Local Government Association. And I'm going to hand over to Janie, but before I do, this relates to the request that this committee made in a previous meeting that the action plan relating to the public interest report be supported by an independent peer organisation, and the suggestion at that time was that that should be the Local Government Association. Janie.
Thank you, Chair. As you've quite rightly pointed out, the LGA, we were asked to approach the LGA for that assurance approach and that assurance function. They have now provided their scoping document for consideration by this committee this evening. The LGA has sent their apologies. They're not able to attend this evening due to prior commitments. I'm happy to take any questions back to the LGA on the committee's behalf. So the document that you have appended to my report has been approved by our Chief Operating Officer, so it has been in full consultation with him. And these 3 questions are actually the consideration and proposals put forward by the LGA. And also the LGA did have the opportunity, Chair, to meet with yourself and listen directly to your views as well as part of this development of the scoping document. When they wrote this, there is just an issue on the times that they've put in about reporting back to the committee, because when they wrote this, this was a while ago. And so obviously they were intending to come this evening with an interim style of report, but obviously we're only bringing the scoping document for your approval and consideration this evening. And therefore the timings, which are at the top of page 14, probably need some reconsideration and discussion with the LGA. Chair, I don't think there's much more I can assist with on this occasion, but I'm happy to give feedback back to the LGA if there are any queries.
Thank you, Janie. That's very helpful. And just to confirm that I did meet with Mark Edghill of the LGA and outlined my thoughts, which have been incorporated into the 3 substantive questions that they will be looking at and working with officers on. And I felt that those did reflect very much the views of this committee. So in respect of the scoping document, that's page 13 and going over onto page 14, do any colleagues have any thoughts on that? Any observations that they'd like to make, or are you satisfied that they do cover the areas and then subject to the changes on the dates for feeding back to committee, that this be accepted as an accurate scoping document?
Chair, apologies. Would it assist if I just confirm to the committee that the LGA has been provided with a substantial amount of documentation as part of this scoping exercise, which you are aware of? So they have been provided with all of the links to view the meetings of the Audit and Governance Committee. So they've also heard, had the opportunity to listen to the meeting where you discussed the potential of the LGA coming on board. So at the outset, they've been provided with the details from the extraordinary meeting of full council on the 4th of May, which is the public interest report and the response, the council's response in form of the action plan. They've been provided with the project plan, which has previously been to this committee, on the breakdown of the action plan and delivery of the public interest report. They've been provided with the current constitution, the proposed draft constitution, and they've been sent subsequent links to subsequent meetings of this committee as well. So they have the agenda and the links to view the meeting as well. So we have provided as much as we possibly can, or upon request or at your request, to provide them with information. We've also provided to them an indication from yourself from the last meeting about the establishment of a cross-party working group on the Constitution as well. And so we'll keep them involved as a virtual member on that, on the progress of the Constitution discussions involving these volunteer members that we now have on that group. So there will be a virtual member of effectively this committee going forward, and I'm happy to send any documentation either from myself or Debbie as part of this process.
Yes, thank you, Janie. That's very helpful. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Janie, if you could just confirm, have they been sent detail? I mean, they can find these on the internet, I imagine, but details of the meetings that we had with Mazars prior to the public interest report, where we, basically were told what was going on and discussed what was happening.
So prior to the publication of the public interest report,
yes,
prior to the 4th of May, no, but they've been provided with links to the website for Audit and Governance Committee.
Okay.
So they
because it would be good, I think, to highlight to them the questions around the audit that we went into, just as, because obviously the PIR was, the meeting itself was obviously the result of a lot of work from Mazars and then a lot of work from this committee. And it would be worth highlighting that to them. And my substantive question was going to be at the bottom of page 13, so second paragraph from the bottom. The desktop work will be supplemented by a limited number of meetings between all or part of the LJ team and members, officers and stakeholders at the council. I was just wondering if that will include Mazars and the auditors, and really sort of who else, because I think obviously it is quite important that we get a broad range of members, as you know, the PIR related to the leader and therefore his executive and things like that. I think just a broad scope would be important.
So yes, the LGA have been provided with Massar's direct contact details and vice versa. So they can both have conversations excluding us, because I don't think that's appropriate. But also some of this as well is, it is entirely the gift of the LGA who they wish to consult with and talk to. So we've obviously provided, Debbie and I and Ian have provided details of this committee, we've provided Massar's, the activities that we're doing, but it does remain the gift of the LGA of who they feel they need to talk to as part of that process and where they seek their assurances from. So we've kind of left that open-minded, but on the basis that we're happy to facilitate. So for example, they've already met with Councillor Pavlovic. So that was at their request as well. And so we're happy to facilitate where we can, but it does remain their choice. So we're not tying their hands at all.
And just to add to that, Mark Edgell, who I did meet, had already done a significant amount of background investigation. I was impressed by the amount of work he'd already done and the papers that he'd already seen. He had, for example, watched the extraordinary full council meeting. So he was well aware of the views of members of all parties and none. And the question that I posed to him were covered, I think, in 3, which is in the paragraphs that says on page 13, scope and focus. It's all very well the LGA being satisfied that a process has been followed in respect of the action plan. You know, does the action plan as it stands meet the 5 concerns that were outlined by Mazars, and then subsequently have the council, as part of the constitution work and the other elements, met those 5. But for me, it's more than that. For me, it's, has the culture changed? Has not just the, are we paying lip service, or are we showing that we have a process that's now in place if nobody actually believes in it or applies it? So what I have asked the LGA to do, and what they have agreed, is that they will then come back to us in 6 months or 9 months or even 12 months time and say, after another piece of work, yes, we are now satisfied that this is embedded within the actual processes and the behaviours of both members and of officers. And I think until we have that level of assurance, we can't then sufficiently say that this has been met. Councillor Rucker.
I hate to sort of say I've been here before, not that I've been here before for a public interest report, but I have been here before as the LGA has examined this council for the culture within it. I have seen a number of reports, some of them restricted to departments, some of them wider. None of them have been satisfactory. All of them have said that a lot of work needs to be done. And quite frankly, I suspect this will come out the same, but it needs all of us. Quite frankly, it needs us, you, me, and my colleagues and friends around the table to actually embrace a change of culture. Because I can tell you when it started, I really can, I can date it almost to the month. And it's sort of gone downhill slowly and catastrophically ever since. And I think it's because, as members, we don't embrace a change of culture. We are resistant to change, and it's been a way of life that we have followed for many years. So we feel that it's embedded, and it takes a lot of guts to disembed a culture and embrace a new one. So I shan't be here, but I have every hope and confidence that all of you will come back in 2020, whatever it is, 23, full of renewed hope, vigor, and joyous aspiration for a council that is going to perhaps do things a bit differently.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think unless we do embrace this, and we do embrace in the spirit in which it will be approached by the LGA, things won't change. And I think we have seen that far too often. Recommendations are made, and then we say, oh yeah, great, fantastic, which is why the LGA's involvement in this process will be an ongoing one. And if they do come back in 12 months' time and say there's still more work to be done, they will continue to work with the authority until until whatever iteration of this committee is satisfied that there has been that cultural change. Councillor Webb. Sorry, I didn't mean to get my soapbox there, but I just wanted to make a point.
I'm not going to get on soapboxes myself, but I would say that I think that is absolutely essential, and what I was hoping to hear from this document, that it isn't just, because I was quite worried about the timeframes, to be honest, that they're going to come back so soon and say everything's all right. I imagine that some of the paperwork might be all right by October, November time, but you're right, it is about the culture, and we mustn't forget that this has come about because there was paperwork in place and someone chose not to follow the right advice. So I think it is important to look at that culture. It is important to change it, and I really do hope that we are back in 2023 and making those changes as necessary. But thank you.
No, thank you. So I now need to ask committee whether they are formally happy to accept this scoping document and for the LGA to start that process. Councillor Fisher.
I so move we accept it. It seems perfectly reasonable.
I don't think we need to go to a vote. I think there's an acknowledgement from all members of committee. This is what we wanted, and as long as you're satisfied that that has met those aspirations that we asked from ZARS, from the LGA, that yes, if you could feed that back to them, and we shall see them at a date to be agreed, but I suspect, if not the October meeting, definitely the November meeting.
Chair, do you want me to specifically ask them about
I mean, that would be helpful if they
to
could.
You on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, and I will
Councillor
then
Fisher?
write, and then I will write on behalf of the committee to all the members. Yes, happy?
Yes, Chair, I am. Just to let you know that we will be sharing tomorrow with the LGA, now that you've approved the scoping document, the update for the cross-party working group on the Constitution. So they will have that, because they've already received the Constitution, they will have the document that you've discussed this afternoon in terms of activities to be taken forward. So that will be part of the delivering against the action plan. So we'll send that out as well tomorrow, and to members as well.
I just wonder whether it would be worthwhile us talking just for a few minutes now about the work that we will be doing moving forward in respect to the Constitution review. As you know, at the last meeting, there was a request for a cross-party working group to be formed to look at some elements of this 800-page document that has been referred to by the public participant. And I'm very grateful to all the members that volunteered to join that working group. There are, of course, any opportunities for any other members to still come forward. But there is now a schedule that we've set, and I think it might be worthwhile if we go through, not in detail, who's doing what bit, but I will be asking Janie if she can send members of this committee the areas that myself and Councillor Fisher as Vice Chair and the officers felt should remain within the remit of A&G, and which ones would be suitable for the working party to consider. Sadly, or maybe not sadly, Councillor Fisher and myself are on both of them, so we are going to have every page of this 800-page document to go through. But so yes,
Chair, there is one issue that has arisen in correspondence, and that is the representatives of the former sheriffs group.
Yes.
And there is an issue that I've been advised that the representatives of the former sheriffs group are opposing the proposal, which this committee agreed in 2020, that there be a deputy sheriff. I was wondering whether, as part of the constitution, they are asking to be heard, whether you wish to extend an invitation to them or to send some correspondence to this committee for the next meeting, because they're proving to be a vocal group with a view about a deputy sheriff appointment. I just thought I should raise it because it will need resolution, and I've been asked to raise it with yourselves.
Yeah. As members will see, I'll come to you in 2 seconds, Councillor Looker. As members will see as we start going through this, or as you start going through this in your own time, certainly some sections of the Constitution are lifted direct from the old Constitution and translated into the new one because they were fit for purpose. However, the one section that is a direct lift but was subject to a change in 2020 was in respect of the deputy sheriff nomination. So that was incorporated into the Constitution in 2020 and has led to, as the monitoring officer has pointed out, some disquiet amongst the former sheriffs of the city. I would be more than happy for a representative either to attend, to speak at public participation, or to send in written submissions for our consideration at the meeting on, you're going to have to remind me on the date, 20th of October, is it? The meeting on the 20th of October. Councillor Looker, as our former esteemed Lord Mayor, who was indeed Lord Mayor at the time that this constitutional
I
amendment
inaugurated the whole thing because we had a very temporary crisis, and it was a very temporary crisis. And I was at the time actually quite happy, and I think I got the feeling council was quite happy to treat it as purely a one-off temporary difficulty, which wouldn't have normally happened, except I'd only had 10 days notice that I was going to be Lord Mayor. Putting your civic party together in 10 days was challenging. So it just happened that we did need a temporary sheriff. But it was quite useful. I mean, the civic party are very busy, they are very active. And it does sometimes help to have, you know, a little bit of backup, so that you can not only split yourself in two sometimes, but perhaps split yourselves in 3 or 4. So I felt it was okay to make that change. It wouldn't, I mean, I'm not sure that we would take it up forever or indefinitely, but it gave you the power to do it if it was needed. And I'm sure that's much more. Can I just say, I was going to ask, looking at Councillor Carr's enormous papers, I suddenly realised what it is. Rachel was going to send me a copy of the Constitution.
Yes.
You haven't got it, have you?
There is one in printing for you downstairs, but printing is closed, so I can't actually
No,
get
it's all
it.
right. I'll probably be in again. It's just I thought I could have popped it in the back of my bike while I'm here.
So it is printed for you, Councillor Looker. It's just that the printing is closed, so we're just
No,
going to
no,
collect it.
that's all right. I will. It just seemed convenient that they, you know, but I could have had it.
Yes, we will be unfortunately losing a number of postal delivery people to bad backs here on in when they deliver these to your house, but I suspect not through your letterbox. Did you? No. No. So yes, and it does say that the sheriff may appoint a deputy. It does not make a deputy a mandatory issue. But I do think it's appropriate to listen to the former sheriffs and what their views are on this matter. So please do extend to those that have written to you my warm welcome and invitation to them. So we are now accepting the LGA's paper. So we will move on to agenda item 5, which is the report in the public interest. And this is, if you like, the crux of the PIR, which was the exit strategies, guidance on the use of settlement agreements, including special severance payments. Now, you may recall at the last meeting, we had Trudy Forster, who was the head of HR, well, still is the head of HR, but she was in attendance. And we made certain recommendations. So we did consider the paper that's essentially reproduced here, but we did make certain recommendations for things that we felt should be incorporated within that. I'm going to hand over to, unfortunately, she's not able to attend this evening, but I know that she has given some significant notes to the monitoring officer to feed back on her behalf to committee tonight. Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. So we have taken on board all of the views that were expressed by the committee on the last occasion. They've all been incorporated, and we have shared the draft with the amendments back with our employment barrister as well, just for making sure that we've got the correct definitions, particularly around the redundancy issues. So that has been through external legal advice from a specialist employment barrister. So as far as my instructions from Trudy are concerned, we have complied with the wishes of the committee, and this is the revised draft that is now brought forward. If the committee approves the document this evening, it will go to the next meeting of Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee for approval and adoption by the council. You did ask on the last occasion as well that to have sight of the existing business case, and that falls towards the end of this agenda item as well. I don't think it's, sorry, I'm just scrolling through. I don't think it's very clearly marked that it says Annex 1, but it is the final pages of the agenda item, which is the existing arrangements and going forward, and they've been included for clarity and comparison. As you were asked us to provide that on the last occasion.
Yeah, and Jenny, I have had the opportunity to speak with Jenny about this. The guidance on the use of settlement agreements, including special severance payments, what is that based on?
So the guidance is based on the government guidance, which was issued in May of this year. It's also based on the views of the external employment barrister as well. And he had, in order to provide the advice, he had sight of the public interest report and the views expressed by external audit. And he's also had sight of the current procedure which was followed, which was, I think, adopted by this committee or this council in 2018, I think, from memory. So he's had sight of all of that. And also it bears in mind as well that there are also situations where sometimes a settlement agreement or an agreement to come to a settlement will be arrived at. Effectively, it's called at the court door, but it's, for example, midway through proceedings or at the commencement of proceedings, and also takes on board that an employment tribunal or a judge, for example, may also express views to both the parties for the employer and the employee. So it is based on all of those assumptions, but it is largely following the government advice issued in May.
Yeah, thank you. And just to emphasise the point that Janie made earlier, the existing guidance and protocol is on page 65 going over to 66, and the pro forma is 67 going into 68. And as you will see, the guidance at the moment, the proposed new guidance runs from page 39 through 64. So as Mr. Mendes pointed out, his view is, are we throwing the kitchen, I'm paraphrasing, that we're throwing the kitchen sink at this. Do you have a view on that?
I think it's better to be as belt and braces as possible, and for interests of transparency, my same comparison could be the Constitution is doubled in size, because we're trying to be as inclusive as possible and as transparent as possible. And there is clearly issues about interpretation and about understanding, and hopefully the refreshed guidance is a lot more informative, is a lot more helpful to those who may have to operate it, and also it accommodates future situations. For example, if there's a change in section 151, monitoring officer, head of paid service, for example. So it should be a future-proofed document. And also the government guidance is much more detailed as well. So they've been quite prescriptive. So we think it's much more inclusive and comprehensive now, and it's a better position to be in, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Councillor Looker.
I'm not sure whether the question I've got is necessarily related to the special severance payments, although it possibly touches on them. But I recall one of the issues that we had in staffing and urgency, and this is going back, it was pre-you, Jamie, I think, I'm pretty sure it was pre-you, was that the council didn't have a process for dealing with a situation when the officer complained of was the chief executive. And because, I mean, you keep putting chief officer responsible, and that is frequently and usually and normally it would be ultimately the chief executive would be taking the final responsibility. But what became apparent was that the city council didn't have a facility, didn't have a process for dealing with who would be that responsible officer if it was the chief executive herself. And I think when the situation arose, we had to bring somebody in from North Yorkshire to take on that role, which is difficult and awkward and not. And it was felt that this was something perhaps we ought to look at. I hope we don't have to go through this position again. I would devoutly wish we didn't have to go through it again, but you can never tell. And it's too late to put the process in place when the situation has arisen. So have we addressed that particular issue? And I'm sorry, I'm just haven't been on audit, haven't been on.
No,
Anything for
but
ages.
it is referred to. Go on.
So Chair, yes, it is referred to, but actually it sits in conjunction with the refresh of the Constitution. It's Appendix 12 in the refresh Constitution, which is fundamentally rewritten on officer employment procedure rules. So there is a lot more now to take into account of the JNC handbook for chief executives and chief officers, and it's a lot more prescriptive in the refresh Constitution. So when you get your copy, Appendix 12, I apologise for this, but Appendix 12 from the top of my head is the officer employment procedure rules. That I was very concerned that the current constitution doesn't even mention the JNC handbook for chief executives. So that has been entirely rewritten in close sort of prescriptive wording of the JNC handbook. And also it ensures that should that situation arise, we immediately follow the JNC handbook. We involve external parties as well as that process. So there would be nothing internal. And we are required to have reciprocal arrangements in place, as you know, for those sorts of circumstances, but it would be very much in the hands of following the JNC handbook for chief executives, which also applies to statutory officers as well. So I've been a lot more prescriptive at Appendix 12. So hopefully, Chair, as part of the bigger overview of delivering against the action plan, that's why the Constitution supports some of this documentation as well, because when you look at Appendix 1, so some of around the decision-making process, the scheme of delegation is also picked up in Appendix 1 as well, so around staffing conditions. So we've tried to be as transparent as possible and as clear as possible. So this suite of new governance documents should all fit together. And that's one of the issues which I think the LGA will probably look at, because it's the focus of the public interest report.
And in our papers, on page 47, in this guidance, 6.2, where the special severance payment is being made for a chief officer, approval is required from the statutory officers mentioned above and from the staffing matters and urgency. And then there's a section in respect of that for chief officers. So it is, it's certainly referred to specifically in this guidance. And then it is in the refreshed Constitution. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Mendes mentioned this, and it's the thing that stood out to me on page 50, item 611. Consideration should be given to the number of other special severance payments agreed in the last 12 months and those the payment of which is pending. Now, reading these documents, it seems to me that special payments, severance payments, should be exceptional, and each case should be treated strictly on its own merits. I can't quite see what the relevance of other severance payments is to something that is exceptional and specific. And I just wonder if you could just give me the justification why that's in there, please, if you could.
We may end up going to our section 151 officer, but Jamie, do you wish to answer that, or do you want?
So from my perspective, it would be looking for themes, patterns of behaviour, consistency of approach, any outlying scenarios. So it would be making you think more than just go, oh yes, let's just do this. It's a requirement to actually make a positive consideration of other decisions that have been made, so that we stay consistent and stay compliant. So whilst every case should be looked at on its merits, from my perspective, Debbie might have a different her professional perspective, but from my perspective, there is a need for consistency of approach. There is a need for spotting outliers and spotting, actually asking yourselves the question, why are we doing this? So it's the check and balance kind of scenario for me. That's my professional side of things.
In that case, Chair, could I suggest one amendment instead of saying the number of other special severance payments, the circumstances? Because if we're looking at processes and procedures, it's not about the number of them, it's about the circumstances in which they came. I wonder if that would be a better...
Do you have a supplementary before we go to Debbie?
Yeah, it's just on the part of the reason you might have a special severance pay is it's looking at the reputation of the council, yeah, and reputational damage. And I suppose if there is a situation where you've had 2 in a year, then that will be part of the business case as well, wouldn't it? And I suppose then there's the cost involved, which would also be part of the business case. Is that fair to say?
This is why I think Debbie can now suitably come in. Debbie, if it looks like a budget and smells like a budget, is it a budget?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I would agree with what Janie said. Absolutely, that's the case. And I would also just remind members of the committee that this is central government guidance, and in line with the public interest report, the specific recommendation was to consider the central government guidance, and that's what this is. So much of this is unchanged from what operates in the civil service, essentially. So I would agree. Councillor Fisher's suggestion seems reasonable to me to make that change.
Yeah. So are colleagues happy with the idea of changing that from number to circumstance?
Or both.
Number and circumstance.
I think it's important to get the thing in context of why any special severance payments are being paid, so we can identify if there are flaws somewhere in the council systems, because that's what good governance is all about. It's about looking through to make sure there are no flaws in your systems.
And my own supplementary to that is what's the monitoring? What's the overview process? Will this committee, for example, have sight of numbers, circumstances of special severance payments? How's this going to be overseen? I think it is mentioned, but I think
It is.
worth asking
So
the question.
it's paragraph 8.4. I think I'm on different pages on my laptop, but it's
Page
paragraph
52.
8.4. Audit and Governance Committee will receive an annual report from internal audit. So rather than come from HR, it comes from internal audit. So yes, this committee will continue to have an involvement.
So will that be written into the internal audit's annual work plan?
Yes.
Great. So, Councillor Webb.
Thank you. I think it's very helpful to have the original and the changed. I think that's really useful. So thank you for that. On page 47, so that's 5.4. Basically, the following types of payments are likely to constitute special severance payments. And there's a whole bunch of things in here, including well, the one I was particularly interested in because it was relevant to the PIR was any honorarium payments or gifts. That's another Latin word. And I think we've started using the word gift rather than ex gratia, which I think is a step forward. But I suppose my question probably around all of those bullet points is, are there any sort of background rules and regulations? I imagine there are background rules and regulations around this, but, you know, I think saying any honorarium payments or gifts without having a clear set of criteria could potentially lead to some troublesome payments that, of course, would then be picked up in the business case and the auditing and stuff like that. But in order to avoid things in the first place, could I just get some confirmation that there are further guidance or rules around those?
In summary, it's development of employment law legislation. So some of these are discretionary, which in a private practice style environment, it's optional of the employer to offer the employee or the employee to ask. So some of these are discretionary. So this is a list of payments which can be deemed to be discretionary. So I think we tried to set out in this document which is statutory and which are discretionary. So these are effectively discretionary, but these are all developed through employment law legislation and case law.
So is there
So just on the governance side of that then, so we decide that someone it requires this special severance payment, and we decide a figure of X amount of pounds as a gift, okay? Now that might be a good thing to do in terms of the business case cost, or it might be a bad thing to do. How would that be checked? When would that be checked? what process would that go through?
So that was going to be my supplementary question. So, you know, you could have an honorarium of £100,000. What would be the limitation, and how would that be overseen and monitored? I'm going to go to Debbie because I think this is finance, and I think it's down to you.
That circumstance is the whole point of this policy. So any payment like that would go through to the pro forma set out. I think it's Annex A, is it? And the details. So any such payment would go through the process that's set out in Annex A, where it sets out who the chief officer is, notification to internal audit, when external audit were notified, who the HR manager was, and it would include all the circumstances of the case. So the point of including those, I mean, I can't speak forever, but I mean, I've no desire to go through this again, so we won't be making any honorariums. That's the correct pro-relevant honorarium. But if that circumstance did arise, then it would go through this process before anything was paid. And so it would clearly set out the circumstances. It would be reported to external audit, it would be reported to internal audit, and therefore it would be part of the report that came to this committee.
Yeah. So, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Chair, and there would also be, because we discussed this at the last committee, external legal opinion as well. So it's not internal legal opinion, it's external. That's one of the amendments that was made. So that was the discussion and the request of the committee on the last occasion. So it's not just one person's decision, it's taking into account a whole set of circumstances.
Yeah. Sorry,
Chair, just one last point on this. So I'm just trying to clarify the order by which these things happen, because obviously if someone is getting a special severance pay, then there's going to have to be a point where they actually get paid, rightly or wrongly. And I suppose my point is it SMU, Staffing Matters and Urgency, that have the final send-off, the final say-off, and then at some point in the future, it is audited, it is reported, it comes to this committee on an annual basis, because by that point, we're exactly back where we started, which was when we pick up the audit papers, we have a look through and we find the word ex gratia or an honorarium or whatever we're calling it these days. And that's the thing that I worry about.
SMU, I don't know if they still do, they always did approve all significant redundancies and the payments that were attached to them. We used to have special reports naming names, detailing details, presenting the business case, so that SMU signed off that final, like you were describing. They would sign off the final arrangements for a redundancy in particular, and that would include any special arrangements.
I saw Debbie nodding, so I'm going to ask Debbie if she'll...
They go to SME for noting. I don't know. So the chief officer, they make a decision, SME make a decision on chief officer, but for any other officer, it's the relevant manager.
Yeah. I mean, that's, yes, there is a ringing noise.
It goes to SME for noting.
Yeah.
And sorry, Chair, there's also a reference to the approval process, which is at section 6, which on my version starts at page 47, goes through page 48.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's just this ring. Everybody else can hear it, can't they? It's not. I've not got. I was just going to say I haven't developed tinnitus all of a sudden, have I? Oh, has it stopped? Because that's an incredibly annoying. It sounds like one of those things that they put outside shops to keep teenagers away. Is somebody saying something to us? I mean, this is a concern. Sorry, I will come to you in a second, Tony. But I do feel that this is a bit of a weakness in the process, and I'm not really sure what the answer is, because obviously, if it was a chief officer severance payment, it would be reported in the accounts. For anybody else, we wouldn't get the details of it, and as such, you know, you could have 20 non-senior, non-chief officer honorariums of a significant amount of money. And I'm just wondering where the check and balance from the member perspective. I appreciate that you're saying the chief exec, the head of paid service will sign them off. But is there any member oversight of this process? Sorry, I'm looking at either one of you to answer.
So yes, at 6.4, it's important to ensure that executive member approval is sought before any offers of a special severance payment, whether oral, etc.
Right.
So it is that, but obviously for chief officers, it's the SMU oversight as well.
So it would be an
it's
executive
6.4.
member. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Fisher, I interrupted. Right, that's fine. Councillor Webb.
Yeah, my last point on this, you know, you've highlighted this as a weakness, Chair, or this is a part of the problem. This is literally why we're here, because we got to the stage where we got to SMU. A decision was made that was not the right one. A disclosure should have been made and it wasn't. This is the nature of the beast, isn't it? That actually we have a process, and we had a process previously, which has, of course, and I genuinely believe it has been improved, but we are always going to be at risk of someone not following the process properly. And that is why we had the PIR. That is why we're talking about this tonight.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that the documentation that we've got now, the guidance that we've got, the outline that we've got, the pro forma that we've got, is now markedly more comprehensive and focused than what you see on page 60, 65 to 68, including the pro forma. But Councillor Fisher, you wanted to make an observation or a question?
I think the key thing is 617. See, 617 is absolutely critical. The question of whether a disclosure should have been made at staff and matters of urgency is a moved legal point. There are legal opinions on both sides of that, very clear ones. But if we have that in our internal policy, it takes all ambiguity, all external legal opinion out of the case. That says, if you're on the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee, if you have any involvement in industrial tribunal anyway, you do not take part. Clear and ambiguous. That's what we need.
Yeah. And I think just to finish that sentence in 6.17, special severance payments must not be used to avoid the dealing with complaints, grievances, or to avoid unwelcome publicity or embarrassment. So I think that this is, you know, I think this has covered a number of points that were raised, or a number of concerns that Mazars brought to the council, that it was being used to avoid unwelcome publicity or embarrassment. Do either of the statutory officers wish to make any final comment? Jane, Debbie, sorry.
I would just also mention that.
Can you speak up, Debbie? I'm really sorry.
Sorry, shivering too much.
Yes.
I suppose the other thing just to mention is that, just to pick up on your point, Councillor Webb, is that we've done a lot of other things as well. It's not just this policy. So we've changed payroll processes. So in terms of authorisation to actually make payments, we've reviewed the schedule of what types of payments are, who can authorise those payments to be made on the payroll system. And we've also reviewed the delegation scheme, so the level of delegated authority, so the ability of officers to sign off those payments has also been removed in most cases. So there are a number of other things around the additional controls. With the best will in the world, people may always find a way, but I think we've got a number of controls in place now that would pick it up and prevent that.
So the question that we now have before, Councillor Webb, you said that was your last point.
It was. However,
you sound like
refer you
Columbo.
to agenda item 2, which is the minutes, in which, and I think this is the right moment to raise it, that I did ask, and I have asked several times, for the costs associated with the formation of the action plan, and the section 151 officer is at the opposite end of the table. Apologies, Debbie, I didn't see you down there at the start. And I was wondering if we could get some details around how much this process has cost.
Yeah,
Yes,
well done.
I'm sorry, I have had that, I just haven't sent it round, and I have no excuse for that, I don't know why I haven't done that, but yes, I can run through it now if you like. So the total cost to date is £33,807, and that is made up of the additional audit fees from the ZARs, which were 23,467, and I can send this little spreadsheet round. after
Please
to
do,
save you
please
writing it
do.
down.
Yeah.
We had external support from Ward Hadaway in responding to the public interest report, and that cost £140. We've had specialist employment law advice to assist in the formulation of the fit for purpose framework for business case preparation, and that was £2,300. And finally, we've had specialist support to assist with the development, implementation and mandatory training of all elected members and key officer groups in respect of the Model Code of Conduct, awareness raising of conflicts of interest and the declaration of interests. And that has cost £7,900. That's, like I said, a total of 33,807. So we're keeping this as a running total. So if any other costs come in, I will update this and I'll circulate it around if there are any additional costs.
Thank
Clearly,
you.
one of the biggest costs that's not included is internal officer time. So I don't know about Janie, but I certainly haven't sat and worked out how many hours I've spent on this. And I don't think I will, because it might be a bit scary.
I think that probably be
clearly
wise.
internal officer and elected member time that has been dedicated to this, but that's not included.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. I think we do have a recommendation, do we? The recommendation is that the staffing matters, we're invited to recommend the following. One, that the Staffing Matters and Urgency Committee at their next meeting consider the exit strategies, guidance on the use of settlement agreements, including special severance payments, and adopt its and approve its adoption and immediate implementation. Two, that the head of HR liaise with the executive and the corporate management team to ensure consistent compliance with the guidance. And that's one thing that I think the LGA will also be involved with. And that the head of internal audit will provide an annual report to the Audit and Governance Committee detailing compliance with this guidance and the council's use of special severance payments. And subject to the amendment that Councillor Fisher's amendment, can I put to committee that we accept all three of those recommendations as they are written? Councillor Webb.
Apologies, Chair. Earlier on, you literally just mentioned about, and the LGA would be involved as well.
Yeah.
And we also talked about there would be a longer referral back on this process to check that it's been implemented.
Yeah.
Is it appropriate to just add to that second bullet point that the head of HR liaise with the executive and corporate management team and the LGA to ensure consistent compliance with the guidance in the short term and the long term?
Yeah, I mean, the LGA's work with the council will come to an end at some time. Yeah. So perhaps a form of words that says whilst the peer review it remains ongoing. I mean, are people happy with that amended word? You're not looking overly convinced, are you?
I probably would just need to ask them, because their scope is the overall deliverability of the action plan. So if I can ask subject to their approval, if I add that wording in for the LGA, because obviously they're not here, and I don't want to, I don't have the ability to commit them to something very specific. So subject to their approval about the engagement with.
I mean, I think as far as it relates to the Constitution amendments is where I'm going with it. I'm not asking them to undertake a separate piece of work. Or we're not asking them to undertake a separate piece of work. It's within the framework of the scoping document.
Yes, Chair, this forms part of
Yeah,
the
that's what I
entire
thought.
action plan.
Yeah.
So their scoping document is overarching across the entirety of the action plan. It's just if you want something specific, I'd probably just need to seek their approval because they're not here
Yeah,
to
I mean, it is.
answer that.
I'm not au fait with the how you would word this, or whether even it is something you could include at this point. But I'm just trying to make it clear that it's the executive that have to refer back to the LGA as well. They have to work together too. And I just, if it's not appropriate for here, then I won't be.
Yeah, I mean, my view is it's not required, but if the rest of committee feel that they would like it to be included, then I'm sure Janie will discuss it with them.
I will. They've received this.
Yeah.
They've received the agenda. They've received this. They received the last month's version of this.
Yeah.
As part of their overarching work, they're absolutely entitled to ask us any question about any element of the action plan, which includes this. And as Chair, you referred earlier to bullet point 3 of the scoping document.
Yeah.
They're looking at embedded practice. So
Yeah.
this will form part of that ongoing work.
I mean, that's how I
regardless,
read it. Yeah.
which also forms part of the compliance with the Constitution, the scheme of delegation amendments that we've put in, Appendix 12 amendments that we've put in, and changes to SMU terms of reference, and this committee, etc. It's all of it. They will look at all of it.
Yeah, that's why I didn't think it would. I think it was a given, but you can ask them, put it in. Thank you. So to go back to the 3 recommendations, do we accept them as they're written? All those in favour? Cool, unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Now, agenda item 6. This is the Make It York Contract Management item, and we'd like to welcome Charlie Croft. Now, just as way of background, members of this committee, and I apologise for subs that weren't given this internal audit. This relates to the contract with Make It York between City of York with City of York Council. It was subject to an internal audit, and that internal audit was dated 8th of April 2021. As this committee is aware, we have asked that any internal audit that results in a limited or no assurance recommendation finding come before this committee. There aren't many, but this is one. And although it has taken some time to come to committee, it's here now. And so I will hand over to Charlie Croft, and he may wish to give some background as outlined in page 69 onwards of our report, and what has been done as a consequence of the internal audit. Thank you, Charlie. Could you just introduce yourself, because not everybody will know you.
Charlie Croft, Assistant Director, Customer and Communities, and I hold the Client Officer function for the contract between the Council and Make It York. As I think I said in the paper, Chair, the audit investigation was particularly timely. We had been experiencing a number of issues, as the report makes clear, in getting performance information from Make It York. And we were also, of course, coming to the end of the current 3-year contract. And I think it was clear that there weren't really sufficient mechanisms in the current contract to enable us to deal with the particular difficulties that we were experiencing at the time. So I was able to share those difficulties and some of the reports that were not being received and that were inadequate, and some of the processes that were not had not been forthcoming at that time for a variety of reasons within Make It York. And so it enabled us, that reflection with our audit colleagues, enabled us to bring forward further proposals for the new contract, that were then taken into account in the executive considerations that took place firstly in February, but then in May after the audit report had already been produced, that enabled us to reflect some of the recommendations into, well, all the recommendations into that new contract. I mean, I think it's important to say, isn't it, that contract mechanisms cannot, per se, force compliance. It still requires both parties to follow those agreements, to follow them through, to make them work in good faith. But I think at least now the new contract does set out the expectations very clearly and unambiguously, sets out a reporting cycle, and makes clear what is needed. And it also sets out a format in terms of a business plan following a service level agreement and a quarterly narrative that ensures that we get structured reports back against the priorities that the council wants Make It York to deliver on. Again, I think, to be realistic and honest, this cycle will not really fully kick in until the new managing director of Make It York starts, and that it will be on the 15th of November, I believe. That's not to say that the board and the chair aren't attending to these. They are. We're having these client meetings. The chair of Make It York has stood in to manage those client meetings on behalf of the company, which is great, and is bringing his management team with him so that the whole company is clustered around it and is really beginning to make this new system work. But there won't be a new business plan in all its fully developed sense until the new managing director takes up a post and is able to convene the company and its officers around producing that business plan. So I wouldn't say that everything is yet in place, but I think we've made a good start under the new contract, which is now drawn up to implement these arrangements.
Thank you. And it might be helpful if I just state that for those that are interested, that may be watching this, this audit is now on the council's website as an annex to this committee's agenda. And the overall conclusion that Verito came to was that significant gaps, weaknesses, or non-compliance were identified. Improvement is required to the system of governance, risk management, and control to effectively manage risks to the achievement of objectives in the area audited. Our overall opinion of the controls within the system at the time of the audit was that they provided limited assurance. And it then goes on to outline in findings, and as Charlie has made reference, the contract reporting requirements were a significant feature. I'll now open it up to colleagues to ask any questions of Charlie and Councillor Daubney first, and then Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a comment, if I may, about the general recruitment at Make It York. I believe it should be a more open process with the vacancies listed on their website with a full application process, and not just a CV and cover letter, which we don't accept as a council. Charlie will know, because we are old colleagues, that I first joined the authority in 1989, at which time it said on the application letters that if you included a CV, it would not be considered. And in fact, you had to always complete the council's full application form. And that provides a more open and nearly comparable process between one candidate and another. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Well, a couple of things about that, Chair. The Make It York is a separate legal entity, and how they recruit is a matter for the company and the board, so it isn't a matter for the contract. However, of course, as owners of the company, we would absolutely expect them to adopt the highest standards of recruitment, notwithstanding that it's not a contractual matter. As contract officer, I don't oversee clearly all their recruitment. I can, however, report having observed closely the recent recruitment of the managing director and having been part of that process and represented the council at various stages within it, can absolutely report that it was a very, very wide reaching exercise that sought to advertise the vacancy to candidates from all over the country, and indeed the successful candidate has come from some way away. And absolutely, in fact, I've never seen such a rigorous process before. It included at least 3 stages of interview. Candidates were asked to prepare initial statements by video, to produce a video just for the purposes of long listing and then shortlisting. So I've never seen a more thorough process. In fact, it's not the case that CVs and cover letters are in any way, second rate, and indeed the council uses CVs and cover letters in some of its recruitment processes. So I wouldn't fundamentally say that, from what I observed, there was anything inferior in this recent recruitment exercise. On the contrary, I'd say it was a model of good practice.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. This is a couple of questions really about the system of governance which has been highlighted in the report. Charlie, could you sort of explain the relationship, please, between the owners of the company, the directors of the company, both CYC and others, and what you mean in section 9, bullet point 4, by reserved matters, and finally, what you mean in paragraph 14 by the client monitoring process. I know I've asked rather a lot there, but I think they're all related in some way. Could you sort of give us an overview of how the whole system and structure works, please? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. The council is the sole owner of the company. We are its entire and only owner. So as such, that gives us the right to appoint all the directors of the company. We choose to appoint 2 councillors currently as directors. The other directors are not councillors, but they are nonetheless all appointed by the council. So as owners and sole shareholder, we have that right. And then the directors must then act, as all directors must, in the best interests of the company, to operate the company for us as shareholder. It is a TechAl company. That means we must demonstrate at all times effective control of the company. That is demonstrated in a number of ways. Clearly, the monitoring officer is better qualified to comment on that than me, but my understanding is that we demonstrate that control through a number of ways. The contract is one of those ways, but more profoundly it is by the fact that we appoint all the directors. And also we do, as the question says, reserve certain decisions directly to ourselves. So as well as the appointment of directors, there are some very specific approvals that the council must make. One of those, for example, is around setting of salaries. So any salary increases or setting decisions over a certain level, for example, are reserved for the council. There are also some financial issues about the company's borrowing that are reserved to the council. One of the additional controls that I mentioned in here that we wanted to see to address some of the issues highlighted in the audit report is about the insistence that the company sets out a scheme of delegation that makes it clear within the company what decisions the directors may take and what decisions they will delegate to particular officers within the company, because we were not happy previously that it was clear at what level particular decisions could be taken. So the company is currently developing that scheme of delegation and will submit it back to the council for approval. I think I've forgotten the last part of the question. That was two parts. There was one more part.
If I may, Chair, yes, I was just referring to your use of the phrase within the client monitoring process in 14. Do you mean the owner monitoring process there? Or?
No. So they are different then. So the owner monitoring process is the twice yearly reports to shareholder committee. That's a strong part of the function of the owner. So Make It York reported to the shareholder committee last month, submitted a full financial report and submitted a report of its activity. Ideally, at this time of year, it would have been submitting a half-yearly report on its business plan. But the business plan, as I said earlier, is still a piece of the jigsaw that is yet to fill in. But it would report twice a year, once on progress on its business plan, and then to have its business plan approved, and then a half-yearly report on its business plan and ideas for the following year's business plan. So that's the primary report to the owner. The client monitoring process is the report on its performance specifically against the contract. So specifically, what has it achieved against the objectives set out in the contract? And I mean, it's kind of subtly different, isn't it? It's not a radically different thing, but clearly as owner of the company, we are concerned with its overall financial performance and how it is achieving its objectives as a company. My particular concern as client is directly its performance against the contract. And Make It York will, of course, report at different times that when summoned by scrutiny committees, for example, and their members might be questioning it about its delivery against wider city objectives and policies. So there are a number of levels and ways in which Make It York is held to account.
I've got a supplementary. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
and I'm hogging this discussion, but so precisely what do you mean by client, Charlie? Who is the client? I
am the client on behalf of the council, but I will also draw in other relevant officers. So, for example, I am not personally responsible for tourism, for example, Simon Brereton is the officer who leads on tourism, so he will join the client meetings to talk about Make It York's performance, specifically on the tourism agenda. And I will also bring other officers in, for example, to talk about markets and city centre. So I hold the formal role, formal accountability as client, if you like, but I will draw in other officers. In terms of the actual ultimate client, it is, of course, the executive. So in other words, it is the executive that sets the service level agreement and will update it each year. And so I am acting on behalf of the executive function and report back to the executive function on that client responsibility for the contract.
I'm sorry if I may. So the client takes precedence over the owner?
No, I wouldn't say that. No, I think that they are ultimately the owner, the shareholder is, well, in the shareholder committee, this might be one better for Jamie to answer, really. I mean, the shareholder committee is also a subcommittee of the executive, isn't it? So in the end, they are both executive functions. I think it's fair to say, isn't it?
So I have a supplementary in response to your answers, Charlie, and I'm afraid I do have to ask this question because that's what this committee is about, and this is why this report is here, is your job as client is to monitor and to measure the performance of Make It York against the SLA.
Yeah.
And the audit makes it absolutely crystal clear is that that did not happen from a period. The last narrative report produced by Make It York covered the period July to September 2018. And that report did not include all of the performance measures specified in the SLA. So what did you do as the client to challenge and to highlight the fact that that report in 2018 from July to September did not cover the performance measures outlined in the SLA, and then subsequently that no further reports were produced, including the annual report for 1920. So how did you perform the duties of the client to robustly challenge Make It York against its, as we now discover, failings in performance? And you did also then mention financial performance as well, was also a part of your role as the, if you like, first line client.
Yes, well, absolutely, Chair. The client meetings still took place. So we obviously met the company's officers on a monthly basis and challenged them on the performance. So the discussions took place. Wouldn't want the committee to think that we, what's the word, abrogated responsibility for monitoring it. We kept a very close dialogue going and continued to express continued dissatisfaction about the fact that the formal reports had not been produced. So we got an oral account of what was being done. And I think, again, it should be perhaps a little balanced with the company. A lot of this period was during COVID. So a lot of it was about, responding very rapidly to changing circumstances. And not throughout all this period was it easy to produce written reports. So the answer is by constant challenge and minuted dissatisfaction with the lack of the formal reports being forthcoming and raising this with the company's board.
That was going to be my next question. So, so this dissatisfaction, this feedback, although it was given to you in oral form, was subsequently minuted. There is an audit trail, and the council's dissatisfaction with Make It York was relayed to them.
It was relayed
and the response was also in writing, was it?
No, I'm not sure that it would be. No, I wouldn't.
So you didn't get any. So you expressed dissatisfaction that they weren't providing sufficient data, and they did not then subsequently feed back that written dissatisfaction.
Yeah, correct. It's not so much data, but the reports, the specific requirement to produce the quarterly report was already part of the regime, and that should have been produced. And so should the monthly CAM reports that are referred to here. Absolutely, those should have been produced. And we relayed that expectation that they should be produced, and they were not forthcoming for a considerable period of time. And I personally raised that with the new chair of the company when he started. I'm not sure that's minuted, that exchange with the board, because it wasn't in a formal setting. But absolutely, we did persistently raise these missing pieces of performance.
I will come to you in a second, Councillor Webb. So we then got a new chief exec of Make It York. You expressed dissatisfaction. Sorry, you're shaking your head. When he was, you said when the last chief exec was appointed,
Yeah, these shortcomings are during the lifetime of the last chief executive, aren't they?
Right. So you still didn't get the performance data. You still didn't get the monitoring. What did the shareholder committee directors do to challenge that? Was that fed through to them? Were they aware that there were concerns?
No, I don't think so.
From
I think
you as
that's
the
one of the
client?
major weaknesses in the process.
Right.
The reports to the shareholder committee were also totally inadequate.
Right.
Totally inadequate. Reports were made, but they were not at all informative. And again, they didn't correspond to any particular format. And again, there wasn't at the time a particular requirement about what form that should take.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's really the nub of the issue in the audit report, isn't it? There were no teeth. There was nothing to. There was nothing to. There were no penalties. There was nothing to force compliance. I mean, again, I don't think we should delude ourselves that even in the new regime, you know, at the end of the day, it is still going to be our company, and if our company doesn't comply, ultimately, the issues still rest with us, don't they? See what I mean? It's not the kind of situation where, for example, there would be any purpose imposing financial penalties on our own company, because we would simply be charging ourselves, if you see what I mean. So inevitably in this arrangement, the sanctions are more difficult to find than they would be in a contract with a purely commercial external company. But nonetheless, what we've tried to put in place here are much clearer prescriptions. And I think the shareholder committee is a really good example, because the reports previously were very poor and very sparse, and really didn't allow the shareholder committee to even identify the key questions, frankly, let alone ask informed questions.
Yeah, I think our monitoring officer would like to just add something.
Chair, if I may, just to support Charlie and what he's saying in terms of putting additional safeguards in place. You will see that when you look at the Constitution, Article 12 is now comprehensively rewritten to give additional clarity and sort of enhanced role of shareholder committee. So we've rewritten the terms of reference of that committee very substantially. We've all been very clear in the terms of reference of what functions it can do for a tech-health company and a non-tech-health company. We've introduced the fact that it's now more robust. It has its own legal advisor. So it's not that, and that is a given. It is not just a discretionary element. We've been very prescriptive in terms of do's, don'ts, what can happen and what can't happen, to sort of shore up some of the concerns that were expressed in the audit report. We've also provided bespoke guidance to anybody who's appointed to an outside body or is a director of a tech-health company or a non-tech-health company, in terms of roles, responsibilities, precedence in terms of the many functions that, for example, councillors have. So is it the council that takes priority? Is it the company that takes priority? Is it the charity that takes priority? And that is an entirely new section of the Constitution going forward. It's very detailed, very comprehensive, and I make no apologies for that, because I do think in these particular circumstances, the more information that is available and the more clarity of guidance, the stronger the roles of either the executive are or the link officers, which Charlie is on this occasion and I am for Verito, and also yourselves as members of this committee, so that you've got a better understanding of the controls which are put in place around managing tech-health companies. So we have put a significant amount of time and effort as part of the new Constitution in addressing the governance issues which have been concerning and which you're currently asking Charlie about.
Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me, I'm going to go to Councillor Webb. Oh, your question's been answered. Well, in which case, Councillor Fish. Oh, sorry, did I miss you, Councillor Looker? Oh, Councillor Looker, please. I think she did have her hand up first and I just missed it. Yeah, well,
Yes,
my
I did
memory's
have my
gone.
hand up
Yeah.
quite quickly. I mean, some of the points have been picked up. But I did for a part-time sit on the shareholder committee. And I have to say, I think it was one of the more futile experiences of my life. And I've known quite a number of futile experiences as a councillor. But that was definitely one of them. Now, can I just clarify, there's a number of ways in which people, and I'm going to talk about people, get involved with Make It York. I assume it's still the situation, the shareholder committee, which acts as the owner of the company, is made up of the leader and the deputy leader of the council. Is that right? It used to be, but perhaps they have changed it.
It's 2 executive members.
It's just any old 2 executive members.
So long as they're not a director of a tech health company. So the executive
That's what
members on the
I was
committee-
going to ask, is because it's also who are we nominating as directors of the company? Because I could see that you could nominate yourself as a director, but also sit as the shareholder. So that has changed.
Yes, I've been very clear from early stage that if you're a member of the shareholder committee, you cannot be a director of a tech health company.
That was actually the point I was very anxious to, because you've got to have distance between the people who sit on the shareholder committee and the people who are, I mean, as directors, that should be, as a council, our first point of call. That should be the place where we are making our voice heard as directors. And I think that's an opportunity that we've got to make sure our directors do take up. The other issue, and I found this very much when I've had some of the Make It York reports, is that I think I was never quite clear how helpful, in a sense, the service level agreement was in setting the sort of performance indicators that you are looking for. If you're going to monitor any organisation, you've got to have a clear idea of what they're meant to achieve, and not just writing a report, but if you've got a target for how many businesses you've contacted, or what the sort of level of tourist take-up is, or, to complain about a permanent beef of mine, what you are doing to promote culture in the city. Because as far as I can see, they have done bugger all to promote culture in this city. So I think what I'm asking is, have we drawn up the service level agreement to be far more clear as to what targets they are meant to be achieving, so that those of us who are then monitoring it, because that's partly the scrutiny committee, but the shareholder committee, have got some very clear guidelines as to what they're looking for.
I think this is a massive and really difficult question that we've wrestled with over the 6 years of the contract, and we've oscillated backwards and forwards in different versions. We've had incredibly specific contracts with performance indicators with really specific numbers. You know, you will ring up 300 businesses per week. You will get 600 more people into work by next Tuesday. And those didn't really work because Make It York is working in a complex economy, isn't it? Where many agencies are responsible for the delivery of the kind of environment that they are trying to create. And they simply became unrealistic. We then went almost to the other extreme, where it was so qualitative that there weren't really any sort of very specific deliverables at all. In this latest iteration, I think we have tried to go back to the middle ground, where the items are each, and clearly can circulate a copy to members of the committee if you would like it, where a middle ground where there is an attempt to be quite specific about the kind of activities and things that should be done, and we should be able to see a specific activity against those things, and an attempt to describe what good looks like, which falls short of being sort of just completely transactional, but equally tries to be reasonably specific. So I think we've wrestled with it. I wouldn't want to say it's definitely going to be right. I think, you know, when we have the new managing director and we look at it again next year, I think it's absolutely the core of an intelligent negotiation, isn't it, between an informed body and an informed client about what it is that can be achieved and how it should be described. So I think we've tried to improve it. I think it looks better in the culture. So I was responsible clearly for the culture area. I think it describes specific things about the culture strategy and about our UNESCO status and things they will do around that are reasonably measurable. But in terms of the big ambition, you know, to make York's culture, for example, you know, relevant to all its residents and accessible to all its residents, again, Make It York isn't the only body that's acting in that sphere. But I think there has been a huge uplift in performance around culture, and I think we can start to see a more informed SLA that is not just the council dictating now, but much more about a negotiated sense of what can be achieved and a much greater input from the sector itself. I think that's the other thing that will really improve the quality of the SLA. It isn't just the council or just the council and Make It York. It's very much more a reflection of the culture sector in the city at large.
Thank you. Are there any members got further points on that? No, if I can finally come in with the question I was going to ask. Obviously, we nominate people to various boards, to the board. Does the council provide induction and training for those members to ensure they fully understand their role? Because, I mean, I've never had any business experience. I mean, I'm aware that one of the members has had business experience, but I'm not sure about the other. It's a challenging role to run a company. Surely induction and training is required, and ongoing training to ensure they're up to date with all matters relating to the legal running of a company.
Vice Chair, if I may just answer that. We have provided training to all link officers who are involved, as Charlotte is, to our tech health companies, members of the executive who are directors, and other key officer groups as well. So we have provided comprehensive training to those involved.
No. Have you got another question?
No.
Thank you. So, Charlie, to go back to the contract, I was only away for a minute, so I don't think you covered it. Clearly, these audits are incredibly useful for committee, for us to identify risks to the council. And clearly, in this case, there have been significant failings. You mentioned earlier that the initial contract with Make It York was incredibly prescriptive. It then moved to being overly qualitative, in that there were basically no performance targets. How did that change come about? And whose instigation? Was it Make It York coming to the council and saying, really, we don't like being measured against specific targets, and we just want to go our own way, essentially? And somebody within either officer ranks or member ranks said, yeah, fine. How did that process exactly happen? That's a difficult
question to answer, Chair, because I think there are a lot of complex things at play. I think it's fair to say that as a council, we haven't been a very good client to Make It York. I don't think we have been very clear on our strategic requirements very often. I think we've often not been at all clear about what we wanted. And as we know, we've had a protracted period of uncertainty about whether we actually want Make It York to perform certain functions at all, and indeed have now removed them from the contract. So I'm sure it's really positive that we now as a council are much clearer about the scope of what we want them to deliver. But I think it has been quite hard for Make It York quite often, and I think it's not that they don't want to be measured. I don't think that generally would have been true across the life of the company, although clearly in latter times there have been these very specific failures to deliver things that were asked for. Generally speaking, I think they have filled some of the gaps, if you like, with activity. So in other words, they have found it easier to report back on the good things that they have done, rather than to compare that activity against the strategic requirements. And we have not been very good at pinning that down and actually saying, thank you very much. Yeah, that's interesting, but what does it contribute to X? And that's where I think, you know, we need to be more sophisticated, and where it undoubtedly does need an intelligent conversation between both parties. It can't just be top down, although a lot in this current discussion is about getting the top down things right and getting the controls right, and that is right and proper. You know, you can't overestimate how important it is that we have an intelligent conversation between the council and its board that has got many, you know, high caliber people on it, that really teases out what the strategic purposes are. And then I think as we increase that sophistication and improve that relationship, I think it's absolutely critical that we have a really positive relationship between the council and Make It York, and the relationship has been very strained over the last couple of years, and so it's become quite adversarial, and that isn't a good environment in which to have an honest conversation about performance. Of course, I think it's really important that we increase confidence and improve relationships, and for us to improve our strategic clarity about what it is we want to achieve. And then it will be easier for us then to expect high quality reports in return, I think.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting observation you make there. And I would like to come back to that later, but I'll move to Councillor Webb first.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about user feedback. So there's a highlight in the audit for current SLA performance monitoring measures do not include user feedback, which is a service specific agreement. And then as an agreed action, the requirement for Make It York to put in place measures to gather user feedback will be included in the new service level agreement. I think obviously, whether we're talking as the client or as we're talking as the business owner or whatever we're talking as a council, you know, the users we're talking about are the businesses in the city and things like that, I assume. And I was wondering what difference will those users expect to see in the short term and in the long term with this change?
Well, there used to be, Chair, an annual survey of all users and members of Make It York, as well as, or Visit York as it was, then Make It York, and then also, of course, targeted satisfaction surveys of visitors to the city. So there was previously monitoring of satisfaction at a variety of levels. Now, whether all of that precisely is in its old form is still appropriate, I think is a matter for discussion. But it's clearly absolutely imperative that a company that, after all, does have a subscription element to it and a membership element, it can demonstrate what it is delivering for its members, but also for the wider sector. So, you know, when you look at culture, that isn't a membership arrangement, that's a city leadership arrangement, and the satisfaction there will come through the through the cultural sector and its leaders. So I think it's going to need a variety of different mechanisms. I don't think there's a single mechanism for them to gain feedback by. They're going to have to do it from the different constituencies that make up Make It York.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Yeah, just a little supplementary, I suppose, and we might be coming back to the same old problem of not enough teeth. But if user feedback demonstrates that there are concerns, which I think is, you know, part of the reason that this audit was put in place, was because members were made aware that Make It York didn't seem to be doing what it was setting out to do. So how will that link into the executive or yourself as client? You know, how will that all link together? How will users be better served in that way?
I would see that as a fundamental part of their business plan. So their business plan needs primarily to demonstrate how it's going to deliver on our service level agreement. So it's a response to the service level agreement, but it also has to show how it is going to fulfill the council's role as owners. So in other words, how it's going to return a financial performance. And it also needs to show how it's going to fulfill the expectations of its stakeholders, and that's its wider membership and the citizens of York. So I think it's one of the three, you know, major components of its business plan and its business plan feedback that needs to be reported back to the shareholder committee. And that needs to be part of its twice yearly report back. And that's what we would expect to see. So yes, it might come into the client process as well, but I think it's absolutely fundamental to the shareholder process. Yeah, if it's not fundamentally meeting the needs of all its stakeholders, then clearly it's failing as a company.
Thank you. Councillor Carr. Councillor Looker, did you have your hand up earlier? No. Councillor Carr.
Just one sort of philosophical question, really, Chair. Charlie, do you think the council's effective control over Make It York is hindered by the fact that we have a shareholder committee, executive members, directors of the council, directors of the Make It York, yourself as client? Do you think all that is so diffuse that we can't exercise proper control over Make It York?
No, I think those are the proper instruments that any company would have, and they're the proper means of affecting that control. I think it's fair to say that Make It York officers haven't always understood all those processes very well and have found it sometimes difficult to navigate, but it's my job to explain it to them. So yes, it's a complex landscape and a complex world, but I think that those are the means by which, you know, that we must properly use if we are to demonstrate effective control of the company and it to act properly as the owners of the company. As I say, I think the key is to establish positive relationships through those roles. I think sometimes Make It York have felt that they are being hauled over the coals in every forum that they attend. And so that then becomes sort of grindingly adversarial. But as long as we use those mechanisms appropriately and positively to influence the company and set its direction and establish positive relationships within those forums, then I think it's absolutely the right way to run the company. And as long as we respect the company, if we simply wanted to do it all ourselves, it would be better to take it all in-house, isn't it? We have to think why we're having a company, and we have to consider how we get the benefits of having that board and allow that board to add value to the activity. Otherwise, there's no point in it being a company. But yeah, if we respect the intelligence and brain power and drive and perspectives that company can bring to us, then I think the particular structures that you've mentioned are then right for us to act as the owner.
I think Janie wants to.
Chair,
add something.
if I can just add, as part of the constitution review and specifically the review of the role and responsibilities of the shareholder committee, we have also proposed that to ensure that it's not just the executive in isolation, that the leaders of each of the opposition groups or their nominated substitute will be invited to attend meetings of the shareholder committee and given full rights to participate in meetings, although they are not entitled to vote on any of the business. So we have built in additional checks and balances and safeguards so that it's not just in the executive in isolation, so that there are. So obviously, full council needs to approve the terms of the new constitution, but we have put that proposal in, so it does offer an ability for other councillors to attend and give that check and balance and additional challenge. It just won't be able to vote.
Thank you. Charlie, I've got another question. Clearly,
Sorry, can I just say?
Oh, sorry, did I miss you?
I wasn't really. I was just, it was. If the trouble is, if you can't vote, your representations, your questions, your contributions to the shareholder committee are futile, because I attended it on a non-voting capacity. And it is, at the end of the day, they can just ignore you. I mean, yes, that's politics. We all get ignored all the time. But I'm not sure how effective it is, quite honestly, as an additional check and balance. It was, as I said, it was one of those committees that if I had a reason to miss it, I would probably find that reason and miss it, because I don't think that worked particularly well. And I could go into detail about one or two instances where I think it was there was real failings.
And that's one of the things that I want to ask you about, Charlie. Clearly, we're here this evening as a consequence of an audit of Make It York. Part of this committee's job is to be assured that the risks of expenditure and governance for all our processes and procedures are robust. Clearly, having got this limited assurance report, have you then looked at the contracts for the other TCAL companies that we have full ownership of? And are you satisfied that they are robust, and that were there to be an audit of one of those companies, it would come back with a positive audit outcome?
I'm only the client for Make It York, so that would be
right.
for Janie to comment on.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I'm going to draw this to a close, and I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you, Charlie, because it's never nice when you have to come and face a grilling in relation to a failing within an area that you have some, if not direct responsibility for, some significant level of responsibility. And thank you for answering our questions so frankly and honestly. I think what I've taken from this evening's exercise is something that you said, I think towards the latter end of the questioning, which was CYC have not been a good client. There's been a lack of strategic vision. There's been a lack of focus. There's been a lack of monitoring. And I think what we've seen as an outcome of this audit is as a consequence of CYC being more focused in what it actually wants from its external companies. And And I hope and I'm pleased if moving forward there is more of a strategic vision, but that strategic vision has to be given by the politicians, and it seems that you've been badly let down in that respect. And I hope that the members of the shareholder committee and the directors of Make It York take some time to reflect on this audit and think, how better can we, not best, because there'll never be a best, but how better can we set a direction for the companies that we invest a great deal of reputational importance to, as well as a great deal of financial support. So thank you very, very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing the next follow-up audit from Verito regarding the action plan. But they do seem to be, on the whole, much more satisfied that the issues that they raised have been addressed. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Fisher.
Chair, are we going to put a timescale for Verito to actually carry out a further progress monitoring audit to ensure?
I think they normally work within a 6-month period.
I was going to suggest 6 months.
I mean, somebody will tell me, Debbie, you'll tell me if I'm wrong on that.
They'll do a follow-up in accordance with the actions. So in the original audit report, the actions were due to be mainly completed, I think, by the end of this month, weren't they?
Yeah, so that would be around, that would be 6 months.
To complete the actions, and then they'll come back and do a check that all the actions have been completed and do some testing around.
Yeah, and then we get a regular update, and I think we're now going into that agenda item, the forward plan. I think we've got a chance of looking at that. Charlie, thank you very much indeed.
If you excuse me, Chair, unfortunately I have a parish council meeting and I think my attendance is required at that.
That's absolutely fine.
I'm afraid I have to go and deal with that and leave you to the Alpha.
Yeah, that's lovely, thank you. So our final agenda item is agenda item 7, which is the work plan. Is there anybody that wants to comment on the work plan? We are going to have to shuffle a few things around. Janie.
So, Chair, we've taken on board the comments from the last meeting, which was a little bit confusing, I think, towards the end.
Yes.
However, the agenda for the 20th of October looks really excessive, and you've already asked whether there is an option of the Key Corporate Risk Monitor 2 report being put to the November meeting. The internal audit would like to bring their report to the October meeting, so I don't think that can be changed. And obviously Mazars have indicated their changes in timeframes as well, so they have moved to the 1st of December from the November meeting as well. So hopefully this reflects the views from the committee on the last occasion, but it's just subject to whether you wish the Key Corporate Risk Monitor 2 report to move.
Yeah, given that we are going to have quite a detailed, though not complete, discussion on the Constitution at the 16th of October meeting, I am mindful that if we incorporate a lot of these other agenda items, it could be a really, really long meeting, which I suspect none of us would. It's going to be long enough as it is. Can I have your agreement? And I'm looking to Debbie in respect of the Key Corporate Risks Monitor 2 to move from October into November. Are we all in agreement for that? Yeah. The Mazars annual audit letter, they're not going to be ready anyway, so that needs to go. Is that correct, Debbie?
Yeah, I mean, we have a slot on every meeting, just in case there is anything they want to bring
Yeah.
to your attention. So
Yeah.
we always allow, you know, there's a slot there if they need it, but as far as I'm aware, they won't need it.
Yeah. We're going to retain the corporate governance report. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. So that report will go to scrutiny, corporate scrutiny in October, and then it comes to yourself the month after.
Right.
Sorry, immediately after. So yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So we will retain progress against the action plan, corporate governance report, review of the constitution, and then internal audit and fraud plan and progress report. That's going to stay in October. In November, we're going to have review of the constitution and key corporate risks. That's KCR 12. Is that correct? Yeah. And then, to be honest, I think we need to play it by ear a little bit and see how far we get with the constitution at the November meeting. It may be that we still haven't finished it in November. I hope we will, but there's a chance that we may not. Councillor Webb.
My only question, and I really don't need it answering right now, but it's with the review of the constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Will it be a certain part of the constitution that's on the 20th of October? Will we be told which bit?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank
You're going to get that in an email. All the members. Oh, tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
You'll get it tomorrow. Fantastic. Because we agreed it this afternoon, didn't we? Yes. Right. Well, that's it. There's no urgent business. And therefore, at 7:40, we'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you very, very, very much, particularly our subs.